Bye week podcast number 2 coming your way on the Saints Insider channel. I'm Zach Ewing with Jeff Duncan and Matthew Paris. And on Wednesday, we talked some report cards. We talked some Saints-Vikings. We talked AFC playoffs. So today, you're kind of getting the second half of that show. Little line change. We got 2 new guys in here. We're going to talk Saints report card for the defense, the coaching staff, maybe some rookie report card, their draft class, and then we will do the NFC playoff picture as the Saints have the week off here in Week 11. So, fellas, first of all, you weren't here on the Wednesday podcast. Any final thoughts from rewatching Sunday's game? I mean, it's been 5 days. Probably folks want to bury the hatchet, but any takeaway impressions that may color the way you view the Saints going forward, Jeff?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd say is, we tend to do this in football as we tend to focus a lot on offense. And so there's a lot of criticism, especially in the fan base, about the offense. But I really felt like the defense deserved the most criticism. I mean, that's the elite unit on this team. And they were down 24-3. I mean, you gave up 24 points, 3 long, time-consuming drives. And I've seen a lot of criticism about, they should have gotten the ball to, Taysom Hill should have run the ball more, all these things about offense. Well, they only had 22 plays in the first half. They couldn't do much because they didn't have the ball because they couldn't get off the field on defense. So for me, it was mainly a question of what is going on with this defense. When they've played, recently, they've the first halves, and Matt wrote about it, I mean, they've been very slow starting. And this was a Vikings offense that was playing with, backup quarterback, their 2 of their top 3 receivers out, a banged-up tight end. They lost Madison at some point in the game, but they weren't playing with their full arsenal. You would think the Saints defense would have shut them down, and Josh Dobbs and T.J. Hockenson just lit them up. And you knew that was the one guy that they had to defend, and yet they just could not stop him. And to me, that was the biggest disappointment. Once they got down 24-3, everything changes. Your game plan on offense changes. Your defensive game plan changes. Everything Minnesota's doing changes. They're up 3 touchdowns. They're managing the game at that point. They're in control. So I think it's a little fool's gold the second half where everybody starts talking about, what you did well in the second half. Well, I mean, Minnesota's basically playing deep. They're letting you get stuff underneath. They're allowing you to it's almost like a video game. They're allowing you to kind of move the ball and eat up clock. So I felt like that the game was pretty much over in my mind once they got up 24-3. Yes, I know they got within a score, but to me, that's the greatest disappointment.
I mean, I think, and this is against a quarterback nobody wanted. Like, I know Joshua Dobbs is kind of the toast of the town, but, he was like in the Browns preseason. He started for the Cardinals and won 1 game. They gave him up for basically nothing. I mean, I sat here a week ago, Matt, and said, there's no way the Vikings are going to move the ball on this defense. And yet, especially in that second quarter, not only did they move it, they scored 3 easy touchdowns.
Well, that was the takeaway for me earlier as well. It's just how familiar these problems have felt, or they look like. I think we're almost to the point where it's past a trend, and this is maybe just who this defense is settling into right now. Now, I think the bye week is coming at an important time because it'll be an opportunity to review the defense to see exactly what's gone wrong. They can maybe go do a deep dive that they maybe haven't been able to do during the week of game prep. But they've got a lot to figure out, and they've settled into some bad habits here.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So we will do a defensive report card here in a minute, and those are some good thoughts for that. But first off, next week is going to be all Saints Falcons. As much as there has been, and we said this on Wednesday, and Luke kind of shot me down and said, well, it doesn't matter and Rod did too, because they have to be better than this. But the fact of the matter is, for all the frustrations, the Saints are 5-5, and if they could find a way to win in Atlanta, they're going to be absolutely with both hands on the steering wheel of the NFC South.
Yeah, I think that game, if they can win that game, they're in complete control of the division. That's a big if. I mean, they're going to go on the road. Atlanta's going to be all in. They've lost, 3 games in a row, I think it is?
Yeah.
They went from being in control kind of to now they're scrambling.
Also coming off their bye week.
Right.
Yeah.
They're coming off their bye week. So I think if they lose the game, they're still okay. If they win it, they're in great shape. So to me, it's now they've I know y'all talked about it on the earlier pod. They've incurred some injuries to some key players. I mean, arguably 3 of their top 10 players on the team got hurt against the Vikings. That will impact how they take on this game. I mean, if Jameis Winston has to play, it's obviously a huge difference than Derek Carr. Some fans probably welcome that. But I do think this game's going to be a little more difficult now than it was before the Vikings game, knowing the health of this team.
Yeah, still waiting on some, of course, no injury reports during the bye week, so we don't know, Matt. But, I mean, to Jeff's point, if they can win, you look at the rest of the schedule, and they follow that up with a home game against Detroit, who's 7-2, and it looks pretty good, especially offensively. But after that, you've got Carolina at home, who's been terrible. The Giants at home, who maybe have been worse, at least since Daniel Jones went out. Then, 2-game road trip to the Rams and Bucks, but neither of those teams are unbeatable. And then you finish with the Falcons at home. So, there's still, and we've been saying this you haven't been here the entire season, and it probably still feels like we've been saying it the entire season. There's still a chance that the Saints turn this around and end up the year with a pretty good record.
Right. For print later in the week, we're doing kind of like a round table, and it feels like, even if they do lose this game, it kind of, or depending on what happens with the division, it kind of feels like we're going on a track of like a winner-take-all Week 18 Sunday Night Football flex. Anyway, I do think this upcoming Atlanta game is extremely important, but they closed the season with Atlanta as well. So, I think that one's going to matter unless Atlanta's just out of it completely. But I think they'll be able to hang around, and I'm interested to see what Atlanta does with their quarterback situation because Taylor Heineke, speaking of injuries, also got hurt in that last game. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what they do there.
Yeah, it's two deeply flawed teams, and they're going to face each other twice in these last 7 weeks. And Matt makes a great point. If you have tickets for that January 7th against the Falcons, be prepared for that to be a night game because it's exactly what the NFL looks for when it's looking to flex that last Sunday night game as a game that potentially could be a win and in situation for both teams, and you don't have any other games affecting it. And look, we shouldn't ignore the fact the Buccaneers are only a half a game out of first. Like, they're involved in this as well. But their schedule's a little bit more difficult. They go to San Francisco on Sunday. I personally still don't think the Bucs are quite at the same level even as Atlanta and New Orleans. And so I think it's going to end up being Falcons and Saints in Week 18, Jeff.
Yeah, and I think the conversation here, really, we're on almost 2 parallel discussions. One is, do the Saints have the opportunity to make the playoffs and win the division and, save their seasons? I think that's definitely true. I think the other discussion is, are they any good? What's the long-term vision here? Yep. And I think that's what really is most important. I think that's why the fan base is so anxiety-ridden or disappointed, frustrated. We were led to believe from all parties that this was going to be a turnaround season, a special season. I remember DeMario Davis in camp basically cryptically saying, like, if you're a Saints fan, things are going to be different. You basically led everybody to believe.
Excited, I think
you should be excited. Yeah. We're not seeing any of that. And so I think it's fair to be critical of the team and yet also say, yeah, they still can get in the playoffs. And who knows, they might even be able to win a game in the playoffs if they get somebody in the dome and things fall their way in a game. But
any given Sunday, man. Yeah, it can happen.
Yeah, it can happen. But I think we all see this team is not anywhere near the elite teams in the NFL. They played pointed out this out a bunch of times. They played 2 teams with winning records. They've never even been ahead in the game once at all. They've been tied briefly, but for the most part, they've been behind from start to finish. So, and those aren't even the elite teams. They haven't played the Niners or Eagles or Cowboys or Chiefs. If they played one of those teams, I don't think they would hang on the field with those teams. So I think that's really, it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other. Even though I do think this team can still go 9-8, and I think 9-8 will win this division.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to add to that, everyone focuses on the teams that New Orleans has beaten, that collective 14-34 record. But look at the combined record of the teams that they've lost to. It's only 24-22. And so, it's only 2 games, and the Jacksonville Jaguars are doing kind of the heavy lifting there.
And if you take out the games in which they beat the Saints, then it's a losing record. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it's pretty ugly to lose that one to Green Bay. I know Derek Carr got hurt in that game, but you'd really like to have that one back, especially that they were in position. So it's not pretty. And you look at their schedule the last half of the year, and it's against a lot of kind of crappy teams. For better,
Yeah, no, outside of the Detroit Lions in Week 13, they're the only team with anything close to a winning record out of all of those teams. So, look, it's probably way too early to, responsibly speaking, to start talking about next year's schedule and what they're going to be next year. But Dunk, you said it. Like you can sneak into the playoffs, and whether you beat Dallas or Seattle or who you might play in that first round game or not, I don't think even the most optimistic Saints fan considers this 2023 team a Super Bowl contender, and there is no sign that it's getting any better in 2024.
Right, and I think the biggest issue right now is the issue that they face after last season, and that is the quarterback position. I remember writing a column the week after the season when we went to the press conference with Dennis Allen, Mickey Loomis, and saying it has to be their top priority, fix the quarterback position. They went out and got Derek Carr. It was the big ballyhooed offseason, signing, and he has not played well. I mean, he's been the biggest disappointment in my mind on the team. His numbers on paper don't look that bad, but when you start digging into them and looking at key situations, third down, red zone, the money downs, the money plays, he's been one of the worst in the league. And that really has bogged down this entire offense. I know we've talked about the offensive line, but to me, it's quarterback play, number one. And that's the most important position in the sport, maybe in all of sports. And the Saints have had, for a decade and a half, had one of the greatest of all time. And now they're in that world like the other half of the league where they're just cycling through either journeymen. They pretty much organizationally decide they're not going to go the route of drafting a young guy and developing because they feel like the roster is mature and they've got this team that they think can win. But there could be an error in judgment there because they're not challenging the league's elite with this roster, and the quarterbacks that they brought in, for better or worse, have not been the answer.
Yeah, they may have to revisit that decision down the road, but that's a discussion for another day. Saints Insider Podcast for Friday, November the 17th is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to bank anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net. Also, please take the time to hit the like button for us, subscribe to the channel, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We appreciate you all. And we'll be back, of course, Wednesday with our next episode. But want to pivot in this one and talk some report cards. It was my bad. We were supposed to do offense and defensive report cards on Wednesday's show, and I kind of jumped the gun. Got scared by how long we were going, and so I missed it. And so Rod Walker wrote up the defensive report card. You can find that on NOLA.com. I think it published Thursday morning, and he gave the defense a B-. Is that fair, guys? Is that a fair assessment? I mean, I think his thought was there have been times where this defense has been dominant at New England. First two games of the season, the Saints probably win with defense, but they've also shown some major slippage over the last month or so.
Yeah, I like that, actually. I think he's being pretty harsh, but I like that because I think we all know this defense has a lot of talent. They're a veteran unit. There's no really excuses for the defense, none. And they've not played to the standard I think we all expected. I think they're getting a little long in the tooth too. So I think it's fair to grade them on the curve that we expected them to be an A, and they've disappointed, and they have to carry this team. They can't afford letdowns like they had against the Vikings with backup quarterbacks and guy that's been on the team 10 days. So I think it's fair to give them a little less than a B, even though I think if you just looked at them on paper, their rankings, they were leading the league in takeaways. Their pass defense has been elite, but you also have to kind of grade the curve there. They haven't played really any elite quarterbacks, so it's hard to say. As much as I want to praise Paulson to Debo and the year he's having, I also know he's not going against Patrick Mahomes and guys like that either. He's going against rookies and backups. So it really does, I think, downgrade their grade.
Yeah, I would say B- given the expectations, but I would also go B in terms of just actual performance. They've still recovered in these second halves. They've been pretty good once they feel the need to be pretty good. It's just a matter of kind of waking up. the explosives for me are kind of the concern at the moment. It's not just the slow starts. It's, as they're starting slow, they're letting up 20-yard gains and those sorts of things. And so, the inability to generate pressure. They signed Jason Pierre-Paul this week to the practice squad. I don't know how much he has left. I don't know how much of a solution that is, but it's still been a pretty solid group. Jeff, you mentioned the rankings. I think they're all kind of top 10 across the board. They shut down Minnesota's run game for the most part. It's just a matter of cleaning up these areas, but they might be fatal flaws.
Yeah, I can't stop thinking about what you had, Dunk, where, look at the court. They faced Trevor Lawrence, okay. C.J. Stroud is kind of coming into his own. He hadn't yet at that time. The Saints faced him. They did a pretty good job against him. Outside of that, Ryan Tannehill, who's been benched. Bryce Young, who's really struggled and doesn't have any weapons around him. Jordan Love, who's been a struggle. Gardner Minshew, who just kind of is a career backup. Joshua Dobbs, same thing. Tyson Bagent. These quarterbacks they're facing, if this defense is sort of what we expected it to be, they could absolutely dominate those teams.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to provide that kind of context for everything we look at to give that perspective. And look, Dennis Allen this week has been pretty harsh on the defense. He's basically the coordinator, and I think he knows they're not performing up to the level that they need to play at. And he even said, he alluded to, and he's done this a couple times now, he did it with us the other day, that they're spending this week evaluating personnel and what they're doing, what they're asking their personnel to do. Are they asking to do too much? Is it a coaching issue? Is it a performance issue by the players? But I think they're considering some personnel changes. I don't know how extensive they'll be, but I think what we're seeing, what I've heard, is that they tend to like the attention to detail and focus and discipline needed. It doesn't last very long. In other words, they kind of batten down the hatches in a crisis mode. They get things back on track, and then after a couple weeks, some guys start freelancing, not paying attention to their assignment, and we see that slippage in performance and execution by the defense in particular. And that should not be happening. That's not physical. It's not the ability. It's basically you deciding, I'm going to go try and make this play. I'm going to duck under this block, and that's not what your assignment is. And the guy gets out the door for, like Matt was saying, a big explosive play. That's where they're going to have to decide as a coaching staff, do I need to bench this guy to send a message to the rest of the defense? Because it's not what we're doing right now is not working.
Yeah. Let's hold that thought because we're going to do report card on the coaching staff next. That'll be fun. But I want to hone in for a second, Matt, on the defensive line because the running defense has been okay. They struggled against Indianapolis. For the most part, they've been okay. As long as it's the running back running and not the quarterback, right? But the pass rush has been nowhere near what it needs to be. And if you look back at the beginning of the season and said, well, Carl Granderson is going to have a career year, a Pro Bowl type year. And then you have Cam Jordan on the other side, who is, one of the NFL's sack leaders over the past decade. And you brought in 2 new defensive tackles and you drafted Brian Bresee in the first round. There's no reason the pass rush should be struggling that much. But here we are.
Yeah, Cameron Jordan the other day had an interesting, I don't know if it kind of sounded more like an excuse, but he may have been onto something too. He was saying because they faced more mobile quarterbacks recently, or not even mobile, but guys who like to make one read and then take off and run to extend plays, they've been trying to be a lot more honed in on having these disciplined pass rush lanes to where they can't necessarily collapse the pocket the way that they want to or beat their man and then trying to go after and sack them. And so the sack numbers, the pressure numbers aren't necessarily where they want to be. But at the same time, they're not necessarily good at containing quarterbacks in the pocket like that. And those guys have still been able to break free. So I wonder, as we look forward to, look to the second half of the season here, I wonder if some of maybe the adjustments Dennis Allen is thinking about is maybe having more blitzers, getting Demario Davis a little bit more involved in sacking the quarterback or sending him after it, using cornerbacks and safeties to get after it. So, but yeah, the defensive line has not performed nearly to their reputation.
Yeah, we have seen a little bit of that. We saw a little more blitzing last week.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Green Bay where Alontae Taylor was set on some corner blitz, so it may depend on the matchup a little bit. But we saw that late last season too, Jeff, and we could be looking at that again.
I think it's definitely what they're going to start doing. I think they can hold up on the back end. I mean, I think
They've proven
right. They've got elite coverage, and you got to do something. And to Matt's point about Cam Jordan's point, this is the way the league's going. It's not going the other way. Everyone's going to be mobile at some point. That's just how the league's going at quarterback. So I think it's a little bit of an excuse, but I think I agree with you. I think he's got some merit to it. But, you don't see the other teams around the league struggling to finish the quarterback. And that's where the Saints really are struggling, is just getting to him. I mean, Dobbs had 3 or 4 times where I thought he was going down, and he somehow Houdini'd out. And at some point, you've got to be able to get those sacks because they do matter. There's a difference between a throwaway and a new set of, 3rd and 10 and a sack that makes it 3rd and 16.
Absolutely.
I was reading an interesting article the other day in the Washington Post about how, at least maybe this season, that sacks are more damaging to an offensive drive than even interceptions, and that you continually get put in long situations. That obviously leads to negative outcomes. So yeah, I mean they just haven't been able to bring down guys as consistently as they need to.
And I think another thing that we need to grade on this defense is they do have a ton of penalties, and those don't show up in the stats per se about the yards they're giving up, but they count. I mean, when you have I think they pointed out the other day, Dennis Allen, that face mask on Carl Granderson, that was a devastating penalty. I think they had a negative play. They got erased, and not only did they not get the sack or the negative play, but they get yardage and a new set of downs. I mean, that's a huge turnaround, and they've had a bunch of those this year. I think I saw the other day they've given the opponent 24 first downs by defensive penalty. It's second highest in the league. I mean, that counts. That counts as your defensive performance.
All right, so switching the conversation from the personnel, the actual players, to the way they've been coached, and we kind of already got into this. Could they be blitzing more? Could they be? But this involves both sides of the ball, and so we'll bring in the bad word that is Pete Carmichael around these parts. Coaching staff. How do you grade this coaching staff? And since Matt hasn't been here all year, we won't make him go first, Jeff. What kind of grade do you give Dennis Allen and his crew?
Well, I think it's got to be below. I think it's got to be a D. I think it has to be, just considering the schedule, the quarterbacks they've listed, the fact they're 5-5 against. I think by every metric is the easiest schedule in the league so far. And it's not only the easiest schedule, but I mean they've gotten fortunate breaks when they played certain teams with guys being knocked out the week before, and they're relatively healthy themselves, one of the healthiest teams. It has to be below average, and I do think they've made some adjustments that have worked. I think that the change on personnel on the offensive line has been certainly a benefit to the offensive performance. I think they've figured out some things in the red zone that have helped a little bit, using Taysom Hill more. So those things have worked, but there's not been enough for me to give them a positive grade.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at betting lines, right? And I know that's sometimes kind of a taboo way to look at things, but that's basically what people with money on the line expect you to do. And the Saints have been favored, I believe, in 7 of their 10 games, and they've never been more than a couple of point underdog. And yet they're sitting here at 5-5, and they've had a couple of real stinkers, Minnesota, Tampa Bay, where they weren't even ever close to covering those spreads. And so when I look at that, Matt, I kind of think the coaches are not taking the players and having them live up to their capability or play up to their capability.
I mean, yeah, if we just focus on kind of the offense for a second, it's not very modern offense. There's not a lot of motion. I think I saw that they were 31st in play action rate. They take a lot of deep shots, which I think is interesting, but yet they also don't have a quarterback that seems to like to take deep shots. So it's kind of an odd mesh in philosophy there. So it's just, that's that classic coaching thing, right? Are you putting players in position to succeed, and then are you also tailoring to their strengths? And I kind of wonder how much of that is being done here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but whatever it is, it does not seem to be working, and they've got 7 weeks to turn it around. One more little report card thing we wanted to get to was how you grade this rookie class. And Jeff, you and I talked on Cut Down Day. We had a special edition of Saints Insider, and we talked about how all of the Saints draft picks made the roster, and their two specialists, Blake Grupe and Lou Hedley, made the roster as rookies, as undrafted rookies. So they had 9 rookies on this roster. Ultimately, though, outside of the two specialists and Brian Bresee, Kendry Miller at times, A.T. Perry caught his first touchdown pass. There's been some flashes, but not real consistent production from this group. How do you grade their rookie class right now?
Yeah, I'd have to say maybe a C-. You know, I don't, there's been no impact really from anybody. Bresee's had a few, but he's trending downward. He's not played very well the last few weeks.
Haven't heard his name called in weeks.
Yeah, if you look at Pro Football Focus grades, what you will of those, not grading highly. I think of the first rounders, he's down near the bottom of impact. So, and then I think the guy that surprised me the most has been Jordan Howden. I think they found a guy there that could be a starter down the road, but the rest of the group just hasn't had much chance. And look, that's kind of the way this team was built. It's a veteran roster. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for anybody other than Bresee to start, I think. But yeah, so I'd have to say it's a little bit of a negative. And look, I haven't noticed this morning, looking at the drafts since the Hallmark 2017 draft, which had Pro Bowlers and
Kamara, Lattimore,
epic starters.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the best draft in the NFL, the whole league in the last decade. Since then, they've not had one player drafted that's made a Pro Bowl. And I know the Pro Bowl is not the ultimate sign, but they've got a lot of guys that turned into starters, but there's no Lattimore, Kamara, Ramczyk dominant starter that's a Pro Bowl caliber player. Maybe Eric McCoy's the closest to that. So there has been a little bit of a drought with these draft picks.
No, and this is a deep roster, but they also have need for certain things. Like ideally, if you're struggling with a pass rush, you would like your second round rookie defensive end to come in there and give you some juice. And they haven't gotten that from Isaiah Foskey. Kendry Miller showed it a little bit on that 31-yard screen against, I think it was the Bears, but then he got hurt. And so, they aren't getting that consistent production. And Zach, you mentioned the specialists. They've really been all over the place. So, those two might actually drag the overall grade down by itself. But I think there are two ways to look at this rookie class. Or maybe 3 ways. One is the immediate production, which we talked about. 2 is the long-term outlook. Can these guys develop into good starters? Howden, I think definitely. I'm not ready to give up on Foskey or Miller yet, or
Bresee, yeah.
Sorry. And then, but then it's also just combining that and how solid is the draft class overall. And right now, I think it would be C average, maybe C-. I think that those are fair.
It looks like what you got and what they've been getting out of these drafts is kind of contributors and maybe even some starters, some developing starters. But again, you keep wanting to find that impact guy. And I don't know if any of these picks, even now, I could say, is going to end up being an impact Pro Bowl talent.
Well, a guy like A.T. Perry is going to get his opportunity if Michael Thomas misses some time here. So, you look at the last half of the season, I think there's going to be an opportunity for some of these guys. It's just a matter, can they actually do it?
I think if you were being kind, you could maybe give this class still an I for incomplete. Because Kendry Miller's been hurt. Isaiah Foskey's been hurt some. The specialists, like you could argue Blake Grupe's cost him a couple of games between missing the 29-yard field goal in Houston and the obviously go-ahead field goal with less than a minute to go in Green Bay. If he makes one of those kicks, are they 6-4 instead of 5-5? Yeah, definitely could be. So there's been some negative. There's also been some, like you said, A.T. Perry has played basically a half, and he made an impact in that. Well, say 3/4 of a game, but he did make an impact in that 3/4 of a game. So maybe there's some promise there, but we just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I mean, I'm starting to see some negative, criticism of the draft picks. I'm not ready to go there with the rookie class just because I can remember Cam Jordan coming in, and I think he had 1 sack his rookie year. Next year, he ended up with 11. So you just never know. win guys. Sometimes their second year they do
Jimmy
blossom.
Graham wasn't much of a contributor his rookie year.
Right.
Just,
Yeah, you got to give those rookies a little bit. What I'm more concerned with is a year earlier where Trevor Penning now can't even get in the starting lineup.
Yeah.
That's a concern.
Last year's draft, well, of course, Chris Olave has been productive, but like it's easier to grade these draft classes 2 or 3 years out. So let's wait and see. But so far, I don't think there's a lot to be optimistic about. All right, Saints Insider Podcast brought to you by Saints. Excuse me, the Saints Insider Podcast is brought to you by Bank Plus. And we're going to wrap things up for our last bye-week edition here with a little talk about the NFL at large. We did the AFC on Wednesday. We will do the NFC today. And, of course, the Saints are part of it. You see our standings up there. One of those things is not like the other, and it's the Saints at 5-5 sitting in the 4 seed right now. And that's how it could end up. I mean, that's how it ended up last year. Tampa Bay 8-9 was the 4 seed. They lost to Dallas, but, at least you had a chance in the playoffs, like you said, Jeff, any given Sunday. But we've talked enough about the Saints. Let's look at the rest of the league. Any reason to believe from either of you guys that the NFC champion comes from some team besides Eagles, 49ers, Cowboys?
No, I think it's definitely going to be one of those teams. I felt last year that whoever won that Niners-Cowboys playoff game was going to go to the Super Bowl, and I still feel like it would have been the Niners if Brock Purdy wouldn't have got hurt. I don't know why, but I feel even more strongly this year. I don't think the Eagles have played one of the easiest schedules in the league. They've not been that impressive. I don't think they're nearly as good as their record indicates, defensively especially. I think the Cowboys will get them back when they go to Dallas. And I think it's going to come down to, again, Dallas and San Francisco. I think San Francisco's got the highest ceiling, but Dallas has got so many elite players. They've lost to them so many times. If they get San Francisco again in the playoffs, I think they could pull it off. But I don't see anybody cracking that big 3.
I guess the most obvious choice outside of the 3 would be the Detroit Lions. Matt, buying them as contenders?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, they have such a talented offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown lets everyone know that he was drafted way too late, but for a good reason, because that guy is playing incredible football. Ben Johnson's probably going to be the most sought-after coordinator candidate this offseason for good reason. I mean, what he's been able to do with that group is pretty impressive. But, yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Detroit, it's more so their offense. Their defense, I think, is solid. Aiden Hutchinson is a pretty good pass rusher, but I don't think they're quite in that tier. And the other team that we haven't mentioned yet, I actually think maybe I'm just reading too much into Sunday's game, is Minnesota. If they can continue to get hot, they get Justin Jefferson back, they get healthy. If you look at kind of after the first 3 games where they've started 0-3, they've had a top 10 defense over the past few weeks, and Brian Flores has been really impressive there. So that team actually is pretty talented. It's just a matter of Josh Dobbs and whether he can continue this magic over the stretch run. But they're a lot better than I thought they were.
Yeah, they're really well coached.
Yeah.
Really well coached. O'Connell's great play caller, and you mentioned Flores. So, yeah, they're a team that could, I think, knock somebody off. I don't know how far they can go without Kirk Cousins, but they're dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other team that's in the playoffs right now, if the season ended today, would be the Seahawks, and they made it last year, and so maybe it's not a huge surprise to see them back there again. But if you give a spot, like obviously we know somebody's going to have to win the NFC South. We're going to talk about that ad nauseum, where somebody who really hasn't had a very good season will be in the playoffs, and that 7 seed's the other spot. Like Seattle 6-3, if we put them in, we put the Lions in, you're going to get a team in that 7 spot, and right now Minnesota's got the leg up. But it's either going to be a team with Joshua Dobbs at quarterback, or you're going to have, I mean, you look below them, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 4-5 with Baker Mayfield, the Washington Commanders, the team you used to play at 4-6 with Sam Howell at quarterback, the Falcons at 4-6, the Packers at 3-6, Rams at 3-6. Out of those teams, who is most likely to make a run at catching that 7 seed? Maybe I throw the Bears in there. They're 3-7, but they're not out of it.
Wouldn't it be the Vikings?
Well, I'm saying if the Vikings are in, which of the other teams has the best chance of catching them for that last spot?
I'll go one you didn't name, and I'll say the Falcons, just because of
You're right, I skipped the Falcons. Yeah,
just the easiness of the schedule of the South. They can kind of prop up there. Tampa Bay has a harder schedule, but I mean Washington, their defense just isn't at a point where as well as Sam Howell has played, their defense has really fallen off. They traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat, so I don't really see them. The Rams are interesting because of Sean McVay's pedigree and Matthew Stafford. Now that he's healthy, maybe they go on a run there, but it seems like they're kind of a bit of a mess lately. So I would go the Falcons.
And the reason, Jeff, I even bring this up is because the Vikings are underdogs in Denver this weekend, Sunday night, and they've still got both games left with the Lions. I mean, they will drop a couple games here and there. So the question is there somebody in that other group that could conceivably catch them?
Yeah, I think the Falcons, as Matt said, just because their schedule, I think they might have the easier schedule than even the Saints the rest of the way. They play and they've made some changes. Their defense is a lot better. Ryan Nielsen's doing a good job there. If they had a quarterback that was just average, I think they would win the division.
Boy, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, they're so bad at quarterback. I think the Saints have the edge there, even with Derek Carr.
It's the Taylor Heineke special.
Right. Now I will say this, they finally got smart and started leaning in to Bijan Robinson. I don't know what they were doing, but I mean, he got 22 carries against the Cardinals. It wasn't good enough. They somehow lost to the Cardinals. But that team, if they figured out that we're just going to run the ball, play action pass, run a lot of RPO on offense, not turn it over, which is what's been hurting them lately, and lean on their defense, which is pretty good, I think they can win the division or threaten for that number 7 seed.
Yeah. I mean, 8 and 9 might win the 7 seed too. We'll see what the Vikings would have to kind of fall apart for that to happen.
Right.
But I don't think it's out of the question that they struggle for a while either against the schedule they've got. So, want to end up the same way I did with Luke and Rod on Wednesday. Matt, what was your preseason Super Bowl pick if you had one, and has it changed now that we sit here in week 11?
Didn't necessarily have one. I thought the Bills were going to be a lot better than they are, so that's probably the wrongest thing I've been about a team this year. So I think we crossed them off. The Ravens are playing pretty well. They just lost to the Browns, but
we do want to full disclosure. This is a Friday podcast, but this is being recorded before the Bengals play the Ravens on Thursday Night Football, so we don't know the result of that game.
That's true. I'd go. I think the 49ers are going to be the NFC team. I don't necessarily know the AFC team yet, but I guess I would lean Ravens, but that's very flexible.
And that's what I said on Wednesday. But again, we don't know the result of that Thursday game, which is obviously a big game against Cincinnati. Jeff, you had the strangest Super Bowl pick of all before the preseason or during the preseason, Cowboys and Steelers. And both of those teams would be in the playoffs if it started today. I don't know.
I think I was ridiculed.
You were ridiculed, and the Steelers have been outgained in every single game, and somehow, like Mike Tomlin voodoo magic, they're 6-3. He keeps doing it. Are you standing by Cowboys Steelers?
I like the Cowboys pick. I think Cowboys 49ers. I've stated that. I don't think the Steelers are going to keep defying the odds.
Could they do it the whole year? That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean Mike Tomlin's unbelievable. They've got playmakers on defense. Which you have to have. You have to have some guys like DJ Watt and Fitzpatrick and Highsmith. But Pickett has not progressed the way I thought he would. Part of that, I think, is they just want him to play the way he's playing. They don't want him to make any mistakes. They're kind of it's almost like the AFC version of the Saints in a lot of ways.
Well, Matt Canada might be hated more than Pete Carmichael is.
So I'm not ready to give up on them. I think they're definitely going to make the playoffs. That division's unbelievably tough, though. But if I had to pick somebody to represent the AFC, it wouldn't be the Steelers at this point. I'd probably go maybe the reigning champs. Just stick with the Chiefs.
I was going to say, I was thinking about it more as you were talking, and I think I'd like to amend to the Chiefs. But
right. I mean, their defense is a lot better than it was a
Patrick
year
Mahomes
ago.
has a defense now.
Yeah,
that's a scary thought.
And they can run the ball. And once you get in the playoffs, man, it just comes down to quarterback play, and he's the best.
I will say, as we take one last look at this NFC playoff picture, this is about as perfect of a setup as the Saints could ask for at this point, where they'd get a home game and they'd get Seattle instead of Dallas or Philadelphia, whoever doesn't win the NFC East in that 5 seed. Doesn't mean Seattle will stay there, but the prospect of facing Geno Smith in a playoff game is a lot different than facing Jalen Hurts or Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I don't think the Saints want any part of the Cowboys. That would be a really bad matchup with their pass rush, those elite guys on defense. I think that could get ugly, but Seattle, they definitely could knock off, no doubt.
Seattle doesn't have Marshawn Lynch this time to knock them off.
Oh,
well, and it was
too soon. Too soon.
That Marshawn Lynch game is you say that the what do they call it? The Rumble game or the Earthquake game or whatever they call. the Seahawks were the 7-9 division
Right.
champ that year, and the Saints went 12-4 and went up there and got beat. So maybe some revenge would be due at that point. I don't know, but too early to say that'll be the matchup. Too early to say anything about the Saints, of course, other than that they will play the Falcons next week in Atlanta, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, in a huge game. We're going to be back one more time before that Thanksgiving holiday. We'll be back with you Wednesday for another episode of the Saints Insider, brought to you by Bank Plus. In the meantime, hit subscribe, hit like, help us out, grow the channel. We're growing fast, and we want you to come along for the ride. For Matthew Paris and Jeff Duncan, I'm Zach Ewing. Norm Bell's behind the glass. We appreciate each and every one of you watching, and we'll see you next time.